Hello, friends. Welcome to the ATC Double Cut. I'm Micah Woods. In this episode, I'm going to talk about 3 recent blog posts from the ATC website. I will give these 3 posts the double cut treatment, which means we're going to talk about it here on the show, and I'm going to explain to you why I thought that these topics were important enough to spend time writing about and putting them on the website. I will bring my screen up for those of you watching this so you can see what I'm looking at as I talk about this. And for those of you listening, don't worry. I hope that you will find these topics interesting enough that if you haven't checked them out on the ATC website, you will go and check out the show notes, or just go to the ATC website and find these posts. We have a very good search function on the site, but I will put direct links to every one of these posts that I talk about in the show notes. So whether you're watching the video and you want to click through to these, or if you're listening to this and you want to click through to these, you can find them in the show notes. The first post that I'm going to talk about is one that is called No POA After 16 Years. And this is an interesting one because most people who plant creeping bentgrass on greens don't want Poa annua to be there, because Poa annua grows differently. It can grow at a different rate. It can throw up seed heads. It can lead to a bumpier surface. It can lead to an unsightly surface. Poa annua is more disease prone than is creeping bentgrass. So generally it will have more plant pathogens attacking it. It's just generally a weaker grass. It has less drought tolerance than bentgrass. So they don't really go well together. If you want to have Poa annua, you generally want to have a Poa annua monostand where you'd have 100% Poa annua. And if you have bentgrass, you generally would prefer to have all bentgrass. But the management of creeping bentgrass is a type of management on putting greens that tends to lead to the conditions that make it easy for Poa annua to invade, because you've got traffic, you've got some cultivation of the surface to relieve compaction. You've got disruption by putting sand top dressing or punching holes to make sure there's enough air in the soil and that we maintain the integrity of the root zone so there can be enough airspace in the soil. And then there's that traffic again. And then there's the low mowing. And all of these things can lead to conditions that can enable Poa annua to invade. So it's common to see in many parts of the world that after you seed a green to creeping bentgrass, it will start to get invaded by Poa annua. Maybe not after year 1 or year 2, but usually at some time at year 3, 4, 5, the Poa annua gets more and more. And then Poa annua has seed heads. So those seeds spread around, and then you get more Poa annua. And it's common on a 16-year-old green in Maryland for me to expect to see some Poa annua. So I visited 1,000 Acres Golf Club, and they have 9 holes there that were planted in 2008. And they have another 9 that were planted in 2021, I believe. So they've got an older 9 and a newer 9. It's a beautiful 18-hole facility at Deep Creek Lake, and Bob Rayleigh is the general manager. And Bob Rayleigh, if you don't know, has a master's degree from Pennsylvania State University, and he studied the effect of phosphorus on Poa annua invasion of creeping bentgrass. So what better person to have been the superintendent there and to now be the general manager and to realize that he wants to be really, really careful with how much phosphorus he puts on those greens. Well, I visited in April. I visited there in April, and I was very pleased to see that I couldn't find any Poa annua on those greens. And Bob was generous with his time and with his knowledge, and he allowed me to record a video, and I asked him a few questions about it. And in this post, I put a link to that video. If you haven't seen this video yet, and if you're managing creeping bentgrass putting greens, I strongly encourage you to watch this video. The title of the video is Phosphorus and Poa Annua Update with Bob Rayleigh. The reason why I call it an update is because Bob and I actually had a conversation about this a couple years ago, and he explained in even more detail in that video his program, the way that he manages those greens to keep them as free of Poa Annua as possible. So I wrote in this post, I said, when a creeping bentgrass green is 16 years old, do you expect to find some Poa Annua in it? I do. When I see greens that age without noticing any Poa plants, I pay attention. That's why I took the opportunity at 1,000 Acres in Maryland to record another video with Bob Rayleigh. So I actually was there to take some soil samples, and we got those results back a few weeks ago. We got them back, I think 6 days, but I was in a hurry to send them to the lab. So I sent them to the lab, to Brookside Labs in Ohio. It's not such a long distance for the samples to go from Maryland to Ohio. And we got those results back 6 days after I took them out of the soil. And I've shared those results with Bob, and I'm going to make a blog post as soon as I can about what those results are, because the phosphorus levels are extremely low. Some other nutrient levels are extremely low also, and it's interesting to consider how creeping bentgrass can perform in those type of soils. And maybe we don't need to put too much fertilizer into putting green turf if we're managing creeping bentgrass. Managing Poa annua, we would want to be a little bit more careful about preventing nutrient deficiencies. Bentgrass is a pretty tough grass. And that leads to the next post that I'm going to talk about. This one has a title, The Time Component of Soil Test Interpretation. Now, I want you to think about soil test results and think about what you typically get on a report. You typically are getting back a soil report that has test results for pH, for soil organic matter, for phosphorus, for potassium, and it's just a number. And then it will say, there's usually a bar chart, some type of bar chart that has bars that show whether that particular element is in a very low category, a low category, a medium category, or a high category. And there's not really anything in there about time, is there? Now, I don't think that's the best way to consider it, because when we're doing soil testing, the reason for doing it is to make a fertilizer recommendation, to find out if we need to apply an element as fertilizer and how much of the fertilizer should be applied. And I think when you have simply a number and a very low, low, medium, high classification, it's difficult to answer the question, how much should I apply? And should I apply when it's low or should I apply when it's medium? Do I need it to be high? There's no real standard way to think about it. And for me, the real innovation that we have with MLSN is a standardized way to make a fertilizer recommendation that includes time, because we don't just look at the soil test result and compare it to the MLSN value. Now, I know a lot of people do that, but if that's the way you're doing it, you're not doing it the way that I recommend. You're not doing it in the correct way, because with MLSN, we're trying to make sure that the soil stays at or above that minimum value. And grass is alive. And because grass is alive, it's taking nutrients from the soil, and the soil levels today for potassium, for example, will be lower tomorrow because the grass is alive and growing. And it'll be even lower 2 days from now. And it'll be even lower a week from now. And that's where the time component comes in, because we're making a fertilizer recommendation for a certain amount of time. We might be making a fertilizer recommendation for the next week or for the next month or for the next year. The way that I'm doing it is making a fertilizer recommendation from now until the next expected time of soil sampling. So for me, I'm typically doing that on an annual basis. So I'm typically making a fertilizer recommendation for the next year. It's from the time that the soil sample was collected. Based on that test result, I'm making a recommendation for the next year. And I wrote this post called The Time Component of Soil Test Interpretation to try to get people to think about this a little bit and to remember it. Because I hear time and time and time again that people just find it easier. Oh, I just check if I'm above MLSN. I was above MLSN, so I don't need to apply that this year. Or I don't need to apply that. And that's not the way to do it. Because if you have, let me go into the blog post and let me describe the example that I used to show two locations that I expect to have approximately a 20 times difference, a 2,000% difference in phosphorus requirement, a 2,000% difference in every element difference because of the difference in demand caused by differential nitrogen rates. I start this post by saying soil nutrient levels are dynamic. They change. In non-saline situations, the nutrient levels go down as the grass grows and uses some quantity of the soil nutrients. This is why the SLAN, and by SLAN I mean the sufficiency levels of available nutrients. The SLAN is the conventional guidelines. On your typical soil test report, you're looking at something with SLAN guidelines. This is why the SLAN medium ranges seem so high and why the MLSN method of soil test interpretation is so much more precise when making fertilizer recommendations for turf grass. The SLAN ranges are so high because they need to account for a wide range of grass types and possible growth rates. Grass that grows rapidly will use a lot more nutrients than will grass that grows slowly. And I showed the football pitch. I put a picture in there of the football pitch at Santiago Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid. That's where Real Madrid play their football games. And I said that the grass there needs to grow at a relatively rapid rate. The quantity of nitrogen supplied to the pitch will reflect that need. And then I showed another picture, and this is a fairway at Sudurnessa in Iceland, which is it's a little bit south of Reykjavik as you head down to the airport. And I said a primarily fine fescue fairway in Iceland does not need to grow as much as a football pitch, and the quantity of N supplied to that fairway will reflect that too. And I make an estimate that the football pitch is going to receive 20 times more nitrogen than will that fine fescue that fine fescue fairway. And I said I don't know the exact nitrogen rates at those two locations, but I expect it could be about 20 times difference. That's 2,000% difference. So that's not only a 20 times difference only for nitrogen, because that nitrogen is causing differential growth rates. Those differential growth rates create a demand for phosphorus and a demand for potassium that are proportional to how much the grass is growing. So the turf on the football pitch would require 20 times more potassium and 20 times more phosphorus and so on compared with the fairway. So the MLSN method of making a fertilizer recommendation based on soil tests is explicitly considering this. Now, I know a lot of people are not doing that, but they should be. They should be. In the post, I wrote, the SLAN sufficiency ranges for turfgrass, and I put a direct link to the Caro et al. Article from January of 2004 in Golf Course Management magazine. That article is called Clarifying Soil Testing Part 3. It's the SLAN. It's in it, and it has all the SLAN guidelines for different extractants and for different soil types for turfgrass. So the SLAN sufficiency ranges for turfgrass consider the soil test result, but don't consider the difference in plant demand. The SLAN sufficiency ranges also don't consider the time period of a fertilizer recommendation explicitly, although there is an implied 1-year validity to the interpretation when using the SLAN approach. With MLSN, we consider both the plant demand for an element independent of the soil test result, and we have a built-in time component for that as well. From the start, we've explained that the proper way to use MLSN is to consider how much of an element the grass will use. We wrote an article, we being me, Larry Stowell, and Wendy Galernter. We developed the MLSN guidelines. We developed the MLSN method of making fertilizer recommendations for turfgrass based on interpreting them in this way. We wrote an article that's published in GCM magazine, Golf Course Management, published by the GCSAA, the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. We wrote an article called Just What the Grass Requires, Using Minimum Levels for Sustainable Nutrition. And this article was published in the January 2014 issue of GCM magazine. And I put a link to where you can download that article as well. And you can read it. And you can refresh your memory about how the MLSN guidelines should be used. That was more than 10 years ago we published that. And I double checked because I wanted to make sure that it was in there. And sure enough, we emphasized as we wrote that article and we gave an example, we emphasized the necessity of accounting for expected plant use. And we show how to do that. So I ended this post by saying, if you are using MLSN, please don't look only at the soil test result and stop there. The point of soil testing is to make a fertilizer recommendation. In order to make a proper fertilizer recommendation using MLSN, one needs to consider plant use in addition to the soil test result. And I'd love to hear some questions about that. I know a lot of people just want to do it the easy way and they just look at, I'm above MLSN, and so I don't need to apply that element. It's pretty easy to figure out how much of an element the grass may use and make sure that you supply that. And that's how you prevent nutrient deficiencies. And I think if you're not doing that, I'm not really sure what you're doing. I think a nice way to do professionally managed turfgrass do nutrient management of professionally managed turfgrass is the approach recommended by STURF, the Scandinavian Turfgrass and Environmental Research Foundation. And based on Tom Erickson's research, they have their method called precision fertilization that is recommending that one would make a fertilizer plan that would supply 100% of plant use of all the elements and simply assume that the soil can supply nothing. And that is a very conservative way to do it, but you don't need to do soil testing if you use that method. If you use that particular method, then you can just be supplying 100% of plant use, and you don't need to worry if the element is high in the soil or if it's low in the soil, because it's going to be supplied as fertilizer. That's called precision fertilization. You can find articles about that also, or links to that on my website. So that is something that I think that if you want to add soil testing to that, you should, because now you can consider if the soil has enough. But that's where MLSN is just so nice. It works so well in being really efficient, because if the soil has plenty, then you don't need to add it as fertilizer. But if the soil doesn't have enough, then you're going to go to the equivalent of what the precision fertilization method would recommend. And you'll end up, if the soil can't supply it, then you'll end up supplying 100% of plant use, which is a very safe way to do it. Now, a word from our sponsor. Pace Turf is sponsoring this episode, and the Pace Turf website has some very good updates recently. If you're not a member of Pace Turf, you can sign up at paceturf.org. It's a $275 subscription, and you get weekly updates, and you get disease prediction, you get weather, site-specific weather, you get a site-specific climate appraisal, and you get full access to the extensive library of reference guides and information about many, many turfgrass problems and solutions to those problems. Some of the recent updates since the beginning of April are related to this very topic about estimating the nutrient use. Some of these include, I'll just read off the titles: minimum nitrogen levels for summertime, diagnosing low nitrogen, 3 simple ways to estimate nutrient removal, normal leaf nutrient content of creeping bentgrass putting greens. Let's see, what's another one? Classic leaf nutrient ranges versus pace nutrient normals, because we've been developing some new nutrient normals based on the way putting greens are managed today. Also, normal leaf nutrient content of Bermuda grass putting greens. So we're eventually going to, Pace Turf, I'm also the owner of Pace Turf, but I do some work for ATC, some work for Pace Turf. Some of these nutrient normals for leaves, we've been giving a preview to all of the Pace Turf members. And eventually we'll do something and we'll put it out there as a public guide. But for right now, it's the Pace Turf members who are getting these updates. So it's really, really quite good when you're estimating nutrient demand to be working with the very best data. And I think that this is the very best data available for estimating plant use. So I'm really excited about that. And I would encourage you that if you're not yet a Pace Turf subscriber, do that as soon as you can at paceturf.org, and you will get updates on a schedule. You'll get it depending where you are in the world. It generally is coming overnight. If you live in the United States, you'll get those weekly updates very early on a Monday morning. When I am in Thailand or somewhere in East Asia, in those type of time zones, or down in Australia or New Zealand, you'll be getting those on Monday afternoon or Monday evening. So you're getting updates at the start of every week with information from me and from Pace Turf about very topical issues and things that you can consider and implement and make your job easier. And you can opt in or you can opt out of those. Speaking of opting in, I wish that more people would subscribe to ATC's free newsletters. And you can find that on the ATC website. There is a newsletters tab at the very top. You can click on that and you can choose to receive 4 different emails. The ATC blog email gives the full text of every blog post on the same day that it's posted. So if you want to get everything from me, that's the one you want to sign up for. If you just want the updates, which is like 3, 4, 5 times a year usually, that's the highlights. It's the stuff that people are most engaged with, the stuff that people find the most useful. Conference announcements, things that are yeah, like a summary of what I've been working on and some of the newest research, then you want to sign up for the ATC updates one. If you want everything, then you want the ATC blog email. If you're only interested in nutrients, if you're only interested in soil testing and fertilizer and nutrition, then you want to sign up for the MLSN newsletter. And if you're Japanese and you want to get a Japanese language update every now and then you can sign up for the Japanese ATC update. So you just have to put in your email address. It's all free, and you click subscribe. But these are very unpredictable. So if you sign up for the ATC blog email, if I make new blog posts on 3 days in a row, then you'll get an email from me 3 days in a row. And if I'm very busy and don't send out an update for 6 months, then you're not going to get an update for 6 months. However, if you subscribe to Pace Turf, then you get a very predictable once a week update from Pace Turf, together with 3 times a week weather updates for your location. So that is something to consider. And now for the final post of this episode, it is titled The Annual and Year-to-Date Clipping Yield. And we're talking about clipping volume here, and we're talking about clipping yield. They're not exactly the same thing, because clipping yield is generally considered to be the dry weight of material harvested. So you'd take the clippings, you would dry them so there's no more water in them, and you measure the mass of clippings after the water has been removed from the area that they've been cut from. That is the clipping yield. We can estimate that from clipping volume. And once I realized that, then I really got interested in studying clipping volume and encouraging turfgrass managers to make use of this really simple tool, this really simple measurement that provides information about so many things. I have been recommending for a while to not only look at the daily clipping volume, don't only look at the moving average of clipping volume of how the clippings have been over the last week or so. Don't only look at the growth ratio for those advanced listeners who are into the absolute latest metrics. For those who are doing the growth ratio, don't only look at the growth ratio. I encourage everyone, don't forget about looking at the sum. Look at the total clippings harvested over the course of a year. And because I find myself recommending that, and sometimes that number is not on the tip of turfgrass managers' tongue usually. I think if I ask most people how much nitrogen did you apply last year, people can tell me that. If I ask what the mowing height of putting greens is right now, most people can tell me that. But if I ask you how many clippings did you get last year, not so many people have that number on the tip of their tongue. But I think it's important, just like I think the total amount of sand top dressing applied in the previous year is also an important number. I think people should pay attention. They should find a way to figure out how much sand top dressing has been applied. And if you're measuring clipping volume, you already have all of the information necessary to get the total clipping volume also. And the reason why that's important is because you could consider that the grass could grow in different amounts. It could grow 2 liters per square meter in a year, or it could grow 4 liters per square meter in a year, or it could grow 6 liters per square meter in a year. Now, if it grew 6 liters in 1 year, don't you think that 6 liters of clippings is going to require 3 times as many nutrients as if you only harvested 2 liters? Because 6 is 3 times more than 2. So you harvested 3 times as many clippings. You should need 3 times as much phosphorus, 3 times as much potassium, 3 times as much iron, and so on. And also, if the grass is growing that much, it's it's producing material in the canopy that probably needs to be diluted with sand top dressing to some extent. So the more the grass grows, the more sand top dressing that would be expected to be applied to keep the organic material constant at the top of the root zone. Now, we can do OM246 testing to check that, and we can do clipping volume. We can do the OM246 testing to check what's happening in the soil. We can do the clipping volume measurement to figure out what's happening above ground. And I think that if you are measuring clipping volume, I encourage you to look at the total. And because I've been recommending that so much and I've been talking about it in seminars, I decided to make a video about it. And the video has a title, "If you are measuring clip vol, remember to get the annual total too." In this post, I said, I've taught a seminar that goes through 10 things I've learned about clipping volume. One of those things is this: keeping track of the total quantity of clippings year to date and as annual totals is useful. This video explains why this is useful. I also show how the year-to-date data can be displayed with a simultaneous comparison to the property average and to the previous year's data. I find that extremely useful to compare year to year and to check. Somebody asked me last week if they just measured 3 greens on the property, would that be enough to get value from clipping volume? And I said, yeah, measuring just 3 greens would be enough to get value. But if you could, and I would try to, measure all the greens, because what you'll find is some greens grow 20% more than the others, perhaps, or 30% more than the others. So then you can start considering, do those greens need more sand or do they not? Should the nitrogen be reduced on those greens? Should the growth regulator be increased on those greens? Is it worth it to try to make all the greens as consistent as possible in clipping volume? Should anything be adjusted? Or maybe the grass is growing too much on some greens because of shade, and the leaves are extending with etiolation, and the grass would be the least healthy on the greens that have the highest clipping volume. But you can start to connect the dots on some things and understand the intricacies across the property. I saw a tweet last year or the year before from a superintendent who I haven't met, but he's won some awards, Jim Pavinetti. I think he's in Connecticut, and I know he's been a superintendent for 20 or 30 years, I believe. And the tweet that he wrote said, it was something like, "This is the first year measuring clipping volume, and I've learned more about the property in this 1 year than I have in all my previous years combined." And basically the implication is, I wish I'd been doing this for my entire career. And when you think about the importance of clipping volume, the value that you can get from that, to understand how the good greens are growing, how the problem greens are growing, how it compares to last year. Because once you measure it for 1 year, now you can see if the changes that you implement to make things better, if they are having the desired effect. Maybe you find that you want the grass to grow less because you find that you get better conditions when the grass is growing a little bit slower. Maybe you want to check how the growth regulators are working this year compared to last year. Maybe the weather is different. Maybe the temperatures are totally different, or you've had a lot of precipitation or that kind of thing. And you feel that the growth is considerably different. It's really useful to compare it year on year, year to date, yearly totals. And that's something that I encourage everybody to do. And that's why I made the video about it, because I wanted to show how I like to look at that and encourage people to consider that number. So I hope when I ask you, or when somebody does ask you how much the grass grew, you will be able at some point to tell them that the amount was 2 liters per square meter per year last year, which might be down from 2.6 liters the previous year, something like that. So it's an interesting thing to consider. And this is still early days in measuring clipping volume. So for some grasses and some climates, I know what I expect to be pretty normal. And I guess I'll be sharing more of that information. You can find it scattered around on various podcasts or various videos or various blog posts that I've written. It's something that I hope eventually becomes more of a standard number, to where people in a certain region will understand the range that is typical of how much the grass would typically grow to produce a certain type of surface. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much for watching if you're watching this, and thanks so much for reading my website. Thanks to all the Pace Turf subscribers, and thanks to everyone who writes to me with questions and with ideas about turfgrass management and asking for some clarification or what are my thoughts about various things. I really appreciate that. And I do try to respond to everything, although you can imagine I have a rather extensive amount of correspondence to do, and a lot of reading and research and reports. And sometimes the emails are things that I get to when I can get to them. So I've also told some people, hey, if you really need me to answer that, and I said I was going to answer, and I haven't answered it in the time frame that you wanted that to get answered, feel free to write to me again. And it just may be that you catch me at a time when I can quickly give an answer. So I appreciate everyone who has the patience with me. It used to be 20 years ago, I would quickly reply to every single email, and now it's just not possible. So if you really need to hear from me, you can always write to me again. All right, everybody. Thanks again. I will sign off now for ATC from the San Juan Islands in Washington State. I'm Micah Woods. Bye-bye.